Hello, my name is Joseph Carlson, and this is episode 19 of The Grief of Politics. I am joined once again by Avin Carroll. Avin, how you doing? Yeah, this month we will be talking about wage stagnation. It was your choice. It was your, I don't know. I don't know if you just, it was kind of a, you didn't really know what you wanted to talk about. I remember at the last episode you were like, oh, I've got a lot of things on my mind. I don't know what I've kind of settled on. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I went with this because
Yeah.
I thought it was pretty relevant for everything that's going on currently with inflation. Uh, this has been a topic that uh,
Mm-hmm.
I've found to be probably one of the more important things that we have going on in the United States, personally, and largely
Yes,
because
it
it has a
does. I
direct
mean,
impact
I
on the
don't know one
life
person that
of
has a job that
almost
hasn't
every
talked
single
about their
American.
wage, once or twice. Yeah, and the economy and stuff like that. So what? So like I always ask at the beginning of this,
Right?
when you read these, was there something that jumped out that was surprising, or was this kind of like you kind of knew this? Like this information wasn't new, or was there something out of one of the articles? Which we usually do three. You have five. I read all five, but if you don't want to talk about all five, that's fine. Um,
I think several of them sort of
I just read them
overlap
because,
and repeat each other,
just to be
so I
full
don't know if there's
disclosure, we had a big
necessarily a
technical
need
problem, and
to
this
have
is the
all of
second time
them.
we're recording this episode. So this one's coming a little hot, everybody. Just letting you know. Usually we have a little time to edit, and I got a big fat error, which everybody knows that's the best thing ever when you're trying to hit a deadline. Yeah, I think a lot of it for me wasn't surprising
Oh
because
yeah, definitely.
they're all pulling from the same
Um,
kind of data sources. Uh, extrapolating out about the same things. You know what I mean? Like they're not pulling something from like Asia or Canada. It's like all kind of our internal data from like the Pew Research Center, all that kind of stuff. So right,
Well, and a lot of it's becoming from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Um, and I think probably if I'm gonna, you know, think of a thing that really stood out to me, um,
right.
was the discussion of CPI, Consumer Price Index, versus I know it's PCE,
I actually didn't write it down out of all the notes I
Personal
took. I just kept
Consumption.
saying this is an
Oh, I'm
interesting
not gonna remember it
statistics,
off
and
the
then
top
I
of my
didn't
head
write
now.
it down.
Uh, Yeah, so there's the consumer price index that we all think about, and that
Right.
is the one that the government talks about all the time is the consumer price index, and the consumer price index is based off of um,
Ah,
consumer reported costs of goods in urban areas. The PCE, which is the personal consumption, I can't remember what the E is, and I'll figure that out here in a second. The uh, the PCE is a measurement of business reported
oh, I got it right here.
data. So basically,
You
it's
did
the
you sorry?
receipts
Did you just say
data
the name of it? I was looking at my
nationally.
notes. It's
So
the
it trails
personal
behind.
consumption expenditures. Okay. Yeah, yeah. I just you because I said I don't know what this is, and you text me this is what it is, and I'm looking. There
Yes,
was
there we go.
I didn't open the articles. I took notes on all of
Um,
them, but I didn't. When you sent the first batch of articles, there's a colon between them. So I was like, the last time the lost episode, as we'll call it, I was like, oh, there's only three articles here. And you go, no, there's five. It's because they're all back to back to back, and wherever I decided to click on, that's the one it opened. But when I actually saw the colons this time and started clicking around, I was like, like it made more sense. Yeah. Yeah, so it's my fault. It's my dumb fault.
uh-huh. Uh-huh. So anyway, yeah, to your point, or to the question, yes, the thing that really stood out to me was the kind of different ways of measuring um, inflation and costs of goods. And the big takeaway, uh, if we
Yep.
reference our first article here, it's from the Wall Street Journal. It was published May 17th of 2019, written by Phil
Right.
Graham and John Early, and it's titled The Myth of Wage Stagnation. And kind of the big takeaway out of that article was by using CPI instead of PCE, we're inflating the effect of, we're overstating the effect of inflation. Because with PCE, it's usually
Can I just say
quite a
that,
bit lower
it's like the third
as
paragraph
far
down
as
though.
how much things have
Although it
actually
talks
increased in
about,
cost.
it does get into this later, but I think it's really weird they start talking about how long things last, which I guess, I mean, it makes sense. Like, if something's lasting longer, we don't have to keep paying for it. But I think that's a weird way to talk about wage stagnation, is to start, with the, actually, I'm sorry, it's the like fifth paragraph. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Anyway, to me, that's a weird way to do that. And I go ahead with your point. There was actually, they had comments, and I just, they tell you to never read the comments, but since it isn't on something that I did, I wanted to read, and it's not, for some reason, it's not showing the conversation. But anyway, I wanted to read a really good comment. It just, I think I said it again with the episode that got lost, with the fact that it seemed like this article kind of leaned on the side of like, well, things are better, so stop complaining. Like, our cars last longer, we have air conditioning. No, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
And that is probably the other really big point that is brought up out of this article, and kind of the argument that they're making the whole way through is, yes, things are more expensive, and yes, wages haven't grown as fast as production has grown. So we're producing more as a country,
Right.
GDP has gone up, but the wages of the vast majority of Americans has not gone up at the same rate. Their kind of counter argument to that is, well, that's true, but you're getting far more value for your dollar than you got for your dollar in 1972. And in comparison, what they say here, Bureau of Labor Statistics data shows the average hourly earnings
Oof.
of production and non-supervisory employees peaked in October of 1972 at $23.26 if converted to 2019 dollars. And we're at the same level in March of 2019. So over that span of 47 years, effectively the buying power
But their
earnings
counter
for the average
argument is
American
that
has
things
not
are
changed in any way,
products
shape, or
and
form.
things last longer and are better.
Now,
And I would argue that's only part of where your wage goes, though.
well, and so the point that they're making is like, okay, so like a base model car now has air conditioning. A base model car in 72 didn't. The entry level home, or maybe not the entry level home, but the average home in the United States in 1972, was a 3-bed, 1-bath house that was maybe 1,200 square feet. Now the average home is about 2,200 square feet and is 4-bed, 2-bath. Something along those lines is kind of what they're going for. So kind of the point they're making is that yes, there has been inflation in the cost of goods, but there's also been inflation because we're putting more into the things you're buying. Like, you're not comparing apples to apples is sort of their argument. Like, you're not comparing a VW Bug from
One
1972
thing,
to a VW
not
Bug
just this article, but the other ones,
because there is no
maybe they did bring it up.
equivalent.
Maybe when we get to it, I'll talk about it. Like, I did take notes. There was this idea of like your nominal wage and real wage. So it's like your buying power as opposed to what you make. And I think that's one area that the Wall Street Journal, I don't think takes into effect, is like, I don't think even though we're getting better goods, we're still paying more for some things. And I don't think our dollar stretches like it used to, Okay.
So actually, they just discussed that in this article as well too. Nominal average hourly earnings rose from $3.99 in October of 1972 to $23.26 this March, a 483% increase. But CPIW, which is the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers, rose 483%, creating the reported stagnation in real average hourly earnings. While the CPIW accurately measures changes in price for a fixed market basket of goods and services, it overestimates inflation because it fails to account for the substitution effect, which is how
Yeah.
people change their consumption habits as relative prices change. So it was an interesting kind of argument they make, and I'm not disagreeing with you, right? Like, it doesn't feel like we're advancing any. I mean, honestly, if you look at this and you say, okay, it's stagnated, then that means that inflation has gone
Right.
up and our wages have gone up equally. In fact, these numbers balance that out almost perfectly, 483% and 483%. Which means that a family in 1972 can afford the same stuff, or is effectively making the exact same level of money as a family now. The challenge we have now
Right.
is the goods that are offered for us aren't comparable anymore. We're getting higher quality goods in a lot of ways. Now, not in everything, but in a lot of ways. And they do make the case here, like the modern economy, we now have access to fruits and vegetables from around the world that we wouldn't have had before, year round, that is. You know, other services have come about that provide a higher level of value than what we would have had before.
Right.
The disconnect here, I think, is this is very wealthy people writing an article about inflation where they're benefiting from all of the additional value because it doesn't really impact their life to spend that extra money. Whereas, you know, to the average worker, it's not necessarily that their wages haven't kept up, but that they can no longer afford.
You know, one thing the people I know that
there
the
is no
working
comfort.
class, like the blue collar people now that are working, or even white collar to a certain extent, like my wife. What I've noticed is there's a really big emphasis on your starting wage. When before that was just a way to, okay, well, I'm going to start here and then I will every year get X amount of percentage of a wage. And now it seems like that is, I think as some of the later articles will show, that isn't keeping up with inflation. So the people I've talked to, it's a massive thing about what's your starting wage, because are we going to get a raise? You know what I mean? Like that idea of like we're kind of here, we have to get as much out the gate because we don't know what's going to happen later.
I could see where you're coming from on that. I mean, I know a bunch of people who've gotten raises. I know very few people who haven't gotten raises
Right.
over about the last 5 years. And I say 5 years because COVID made everything weird and strange. Like my wife and her new job that she's been at for like 4 months got a huge raise this
Right.
month because
Which
company
in the
had to
last
completely
episode we
change their
did
pay
address
structure to
that
keep
about
people
how
because they were just
it
losing
was
too many people
before
too
that like
quickly.
the companies had more power,
So
and it's starting to swing the other way where because of COVID, employees understand that they maybe have more options, because if you get laid off or furloughed during COVID, you're maybe already at rock bottom, so you really don't have anything to lose. I would just want to address one thing as a liberal hippie too. I have read a lot about this stuff with the government handouts and how people get used to those. But one thing that those people that say that, and mostly it's on the right, they don't address is those benefits do run out and they are lessened over a period of time. So like at one time during the pandemic, you were getting 600 and some odd dollars a month, which was nice or whatever, like monthly unemployment. But then that dropped down to $350 and then it ended. And that was 18 months, I think, over that period. So you went from like 600 and then it ended. And so this idea that I hear again on the right of like people sitting home cashing a fat check. I mean, I understand we get stimulus, but like even if you take the 1,200 and add 350 to that, that really, you can't stretch that out over several months. You know what I mean? Because we only got what, 2 stimulus checks, I think. And then if you're still getting your 350, like that's like the math doesn't add up, for people to. Now, I'm sure there is some people that were able to extend that because you could apply for extensions and all that. But really, if it's 350, I don't know who is fine with 350 a month or every 2 weeks or whatever. I think my wife got it every 2 weeks. I mean, that's hard. $700 a month, like that's not, you know.
Well, and I mean that's not really the full picture either, right? Because it started off with
Then you got a federal,
the state
right?
level of unemployment insurance, and you got the federal overlay on top of that. So there were people
Right.
that were making more money to be on unemployment than they were fully employed. Now, is that necessarily a bad thing? I mean, you can make the argument one way or the other. I'm the crazy person that also thinks that no one should ever get money back from the government beyond what brings them back to zero in taxes. I don't think that it is right, one, but also too good for our country as a whole for us to be kind of running in the negative. But I also know why they did it, where they gave unemployment higher than what a person was making. And that was
just with COVID, I remember watching those press conferences just in our state where they're like, they had the head of unemployment at the press conference with the governor. And I know you don't like the governor, but the fact that they're like, bring this person out and they're going to tell you exactly how this works. And they were fielding all sorts of questions about, this is when this is going to happen. Then this will be whatever. If you're denied, please call, like they went through the whole thing, the whole process, which again, even if you don't like the governor, it's good that he wasn't just like blowing. He's like, no, we're going to bring the person out that runs the department to tell you how it's going to go. So you're like, okay, well, at least, he's not just like reading a bullet point or something, So I don't know. I'm not saying people didn't rip off like unemployment, but I know those benefits do run out. And, my mother was on unemployment for a while. My wife was. That stuff runs out. So, yeah.
Yeah. They're not permanent, but you do run into some level of concern in that, right? I'm not a person that agrees in legislating towards the minority, because
we might talk about that on a future episode. Who knows? Legislating for the minority. No, I mean voters and things of
minority as in marginalized people, minority as in not talking about demographics when I say legislating for the minority, where you're
right.
Denying a law because 5% of people may abuse it, or 5% of users may be fraud, right? So getting rid of Medicare because 5% of Medicare is fraudulent is just idiotic, right? Like you wouldn't do that. So in this context too, getting rid of unemployment insurance because 5% or 10%.
It reminds me. There was a good quote in Deadwood. It was like the third season where one of the characters was talking to somebody, and he said, I think one of your guys is trying to rip me off, and normally I wouldn't say anything because I understand people trying to steal a little bit off the top, like that's normal, but this is egregious. And I thought that was hilarious. I was like, yeah, you kind of expect it, no matter what you're running, you expect a little bit of grift, okay, that's a marginal 2 to 5%. Sure. I don't like it, but
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I do think it's government's responsibility to keep that as tight as possible, because that's money, that's our money, right? We're giving that to the government to do the work that we have asked them to do. So use our money responsibly. But also not creating a law or not creating a program simply because some people may abuse it is just dumb. Now, on the flip side of it, there doesn't.
No, I'm totally up for that. It's you definitely want to keep an eye on it, but I don't know. If I was
abuse,
I would never run anything.
And I do also agree, though. I do also agree though with the concept of like keep giving people government handouts. Like
Yeah.
they become accustomed to it. It becomes a part of their budget and how they live, and
Right.
it can become basically habit forming, where they have to have it, or they can't support themselves anymore, and it can be very dangerous. And
Yeah.
there are
Well, I
programs
think we talked about
separate
it in
from what we're
UBI.
discussing
We
right
brought up some
here
articles, but
that
it was like
do run
pilot programs,
indefinitely.
and they had a clear turn on and shut off date, so they could tell people that were involved in the programs, "Hey, you're going to run from June 2019 to June 2020, and plan accordingly." Which, you know,
But
it's,
what
yeah,
does the credit market tell us about that though? Oh,
yeah,
introductory offer, 0% interest. Oh yeah, I'll pay that off before I get to that point. Oh crap, I didn't pay that off. Now I have to pay interest. Like people aren't good about future casting. There's oh man, I wish I could remember off the top of my head, but there is actual psychological
mm.
studies on the ability of human
Anything.
beings
There's
to
so
future
like we've
cast, and
talked
it's
about it
one
on
of the
the
reasons
show
that we
several
don't do a
episodes.
good job in
Anything
saving
that
for
has to involve with
retirement.
the future, unless it's
It's one
right
of
in
the
our
reasons
face,
that
we're
we
just
don't
like,
do
meh.
a good.
Like no, yeah. Anything,
Yep.
anything. You can throw a dartboard. I can have a dartboard on my wall with any
Okay.
topic and throw it and be like, we don't care about that because it isn't affecting us or whatever. So
hmm And so, because of that, like programs like that do create an issue, right? Like this is definitely giving a man a fish instead of teaching a man to fish.
right,
Um,
right,
and I'm way more in favor of teaching a man to
yeah,
fish than giving a man a fish. But that's way more expensive to the government to do, and more challenging. It's easy to solve a problem by giving money. And we live in a region of affluence where that is what people want to do. People don't want to
yeah.
commit their time, effort,
I
and
agree.
energy into other people.
Yeah.
They want to write a check
What's
and let the
the
problem
what?
disappear.
Yeah. What's the next article you want to?
In our area, region as a whole. So the next
Hey,
article, when we talked about classes before,
I
in the
hope it doesn't
last
happen
episode,
again.
or last
But I'm
recording,
kind of glad it did because I had more
was
time to read these and kind of dig into stuff. And I actually read a graph, so you should be really happy with that. I actually looked at a graph, like several of them, and I know I had to lay down and turn the lights off afterward. Yeah, I had
oh,
to lay down and turn the lights off
you're
and put a
feeling
cold rag
okay?
over my forehead afterwards. It was
Data.
rough. My wife couldn't talk to me. There was like 20 minutes of me just like don't bother me. I had to. What's the next one you wanted to?
So the next one I wanted to go into um, was actually the last article I sent you because
Paywall?
all of
Oh,
the initial articles I sent were all um, several years old and they weren't completely relevant.
oh
So the
yeah,
last
yeah.
one I sent and the one I wanted to go into now is an article from the Dallas Fed. So it's
Mm-hmm.
dallasfed.org. It's titled Real Wages Grew During 2 Years of COVID-19 After Controlling for Workforce Composition. So it's a complex
Oh, okay, yeah,
article.
yeah.
It's written by Sean Howard, Robert Rich, and Joseph Tracy, and it is dense. There's a lot of data. They actually talk about a lot of math, um, and they talk about their approach to the study. So um, I'm going to tighten down a little bit in what I'm going to quote. To determine if workers have experienced real wage gains, we first need to select a gauge of wage growth. A popular measure is average hourly earnings, or AHE, aggregate payroll divided by aggregate hours. That's how they calculate AHE, which is based off of data from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics monthly
Well,
survey of
this
businesses and
wasn't like you
staffing.
had another one with like
Just
other
connect
graphs that
yourself
look
to
like
look at my article.
mountains, and that was the one where. Okay, great. Okay, we'll go over this one, Frank. So many
I want to
graphs.
get to that one too. That's
Joe, are
the
you
third one that I
awake?
want to get
Like
to.
you'll have to have my wife come in and poke me with a stick.
You're like, oh, right, you're going to pick that one.
Yeah, are you up? Yeah, I'm up. I'm up. I'm up. What?
Um, so the really big eye opener in this particular article, and the reason I wanted to come to it is because it points out uh, several things in this discussion. And the first really big thing was
Oh yeah, yeah. That
kind of the
was actually pretty
composition
interesting.
and how it affects how we measure average hourly earnings. And it's really important to knowing the truth of what's going on. And so I do consider myself more conservative, um, but I also consider myself a person that wants the truth. I'm willing to
I would
change my
imagine. Yeah,
viewpoints when
that's
I'm
actually a good
confronted with
trait,
new
Avin. I don't
data.
know if anybody said that to you before, but that's a
That's good
positive
and
thing.
scientific, but I'm not willing to change my viewpoint.
You're on the right. You're on the right track.
And I'm glad to hear it. I wish there were more people in the world that would. So, like, I get really frustrated when I'm
Those are the
perusing through
worst.
Facebook or Instagram or something, and someone has shared a meme or a comic or a post that is mocking either Democrats, liberals, or Republicans, conservatives, using data or viewpoints taken completely out of context or without actually
Right.
even knowing all of the information, like using a talking point to make the argument for the whole case. It drives me up the wall. And so in this case, in this particular topic, like I am someone that believes like, hey, we need to do something about this because the United States of America historically has always been its strongest, has performed its best. The culture and the society has,
Anything.
contributed more to the arts, more to science, more to just the
Right.
betterment of humanity
Yeah,
as a
it's true.
whole. When the middle class is at their wealthiest, and so I'm a huge proponent for like the bulk of earnings in the United States should be in a bell curve where
Yeah, I agree with
the
that. Yeah.
money is largely concentrated in the middle class. That's just not it's not the case, and I think a large part of that is because um, in the 1970s, and no one, I don't know if any of these
Was
points has
that
been
the?
directly
Was that
addressed,
because
but in the
I wrote it
1970s
down?
there
Hang
was a
on.
shift in kind of the
The
focus of how
Economic
business
Policy
was run,
Foundation article.
and
There's a lot of figures, which I didn't write the chart down. I just wrote. I just wrote down like mention this figure, mention that figure, because they had a lot of charts for like to show this.
mm, mhm. Well, we can come back to that. So I went way off. I mean, related to the topic, but way off this article. And the big thing in this article that stood out was we use the current population survey, CPS, to estimate these composition effects. And what the composition effect basically is as workers enter and as workers leave the workforce,
Right.
it has a huge impact on the average hourly earnings total. Because if the people leaving the workforce are tenured, high wage earners, it's going to have a much bigger impact on the average hourly earnings than if
Right.
there's a whole bunch of low wage earners entering the workforce. So they kind of make the case and they go through the
Bless you.
math, and anyone that goes through and reads this article, you'll be able to figure out. But basically, what they say to is over the 37-year period, and they're doing from 92 to 2019, or 82 to 2019, um, composition effect composition effects have an average of a negative 0.82%, lowering the AHE growth, the average hourly earnings
Yes.
growth. So it's actually skewing towards the
Right.
negative, the average hourly earnings growth because of that
Of the
labor
people
effect
moving, like
or
retiring, and
that
then the younger people coming in.
population effect there,
Right.
composition. hmm And so they kind of pivot from there and talk about what happened during COVID-19 when everyone left the workforce at the lower end of the earning spectrum. And typical white
Yep.
collar workers were far more suited for pivoting to remote work or work from home. Whereas the service workers,
Right.
restaurants,
Well, I think that. I mean, they
hotels,
could, but it was
travel,
much later. Like
they
restaurants
typ-
figured out how to do more to go and delivery, but that was like obviously, like you're saying, it took a while. Right, yeah. And I mean, I had this sad moment. We've talked about dining
But
out a
even
lot during
still,
the
it wasn't
pandemic,
full
but
staff,
I went into
right?
one of my favorite Italian places, and it's usually packed. And because of the pandemic, they had like one waitress. The cooks were working. The owner was there. They're handing out to go orders. So like you think to yourself like, okay, so she was assigned to work that night, but like how do they do that with the other people? Are they going, okay, you're Monday, then they're Tuesday, and then people are still tipping. Like I still tipped because I was like, I love this place, I wanted to do well, so I'm tipping. But then that's a big thing because you don't need like a full staff to do takeout orders. They're bagging or boxing them up and shipping them out the door. So there's that whole industry of like what's happening to the service sector. Like it sucks.
Yep. And it's continuing, right?
Yeah.
It's not. I mean, it is beginning to slowly improve, but that's sort of the Great Resignation. Um, so the kind of takeaway or conclusion at the end of this article is they basically take the average hourly earnings growth and then they adjust it for the
Mm-hmm.
composition effect, and they adjust it for inflation. And it actually ends up being that at the end of Q4 in 2021, real wages had or
That's good.
real wages had
That's
grown
good.
by about 7.5%, or average hourly earnings had grown by about 7.5%. But because of inflation, uh,
Uh,
it ended up actually being that wages were slightly negative. Um, so it's like, oh, cool, we're getting these raises. This is great. And this was even my initial response too in 2021. I was talking to a friend about it. I'm like, great, like
right.
workers finally have some leverage. We can finally start to get back some of that productivity that we weren't taking part of.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, that was one of the points. I don't know
and
if you want to wait till later, but
the reality of
again,
it
the
is
last
because
episode, we're going
inflation's
to keep
been so
talking
high,
about that
we're
because
not.
it was fraught. But I had good points, but I was always looking at the timer because I would crash every 2 minutes. So I was like panicking. But your point was that, like, again, that the middle class is when we're doing the best. And the fact that it seems lately that the middle class has been cut out of this prosperity. And that actually might lead to the last article or whatever, where they have so many graphs and figures, and I gotta say, looking at each one of those, on each bullet point of it was the Economic Policy Foundation article. Oh crap! Well, anyway,
Institute,
the figure.
Economic Policy Institute, EPI.org.
Yeah,
The article is
I
Wage Stagnation in Nine Charts,
yeah
written January 6,
I
2015,
wrote
by
down
Lawrence
four of the figures
Michel,
to look at.
Louise Gould, and Josh Pippins.
I mean, figure two I think was pretty cool, which I can't believe I'm saying that about a graph again. That just blows my mind. Let's see here. Wage. EPI.org. That's the EPI.org one, right? Here we go. Yeah. So I wrote down
Yep, yep. And this
figure.
is
What are you
the
looking at?
one
Figure
that I've
two?
seen many times, right? Like
Yeah.
this chart shows how figure two. This is the chart that I saw years ago that highlighted this exact issue, which brought it to
Yeah,
my
because I
attention,
mean, basically, to
which then
describe a
made me
chart
like,
to
no,
the
this is
audio
really the
listeners,
issue.
at
Like we got to figure out how to fix
1973,
this.
two lines converge between hourly compensation and productivity, and then they grow out like a Y, with productivity growing on the chart and the hourly compensation kind of staying kind of a flat line ish. So basically, you basically have the letter Y growing out, but obviously productivity is
Yep.
skyrocketing. So you're basically working more for, you know, your same hourly wage. Um,
And to measure productivity, what they're talking about, I'll actually read specifically so that it's more clear. Um, when they're talking about productivity, they're talking
right.
about the growth of output of goods and services less depreciation per hour. So we're selling more goods and services, we're getting more goods and services out, um,
Right.
but the average worker isn't benefiting from that higher level of production.
Right.
The and actually I shouldn't even say the average, it's the vast majority of workers. And this
Mm.
exact number is from 1973 to 2013, and that's what they measure here. It's not 200, 74.4% higher from 73 to 2013
Mm. Yeah.
in
I
production,
mean, every one of these
but hourly
charts is like
compensation is only at
the worst letter
9.2%.
Y ever. Like, you know, the
So,
is like it's yeah, like figure 3 when they talk about figure 3 when it comes to the pace
for a
of
whole bunch
annual
of
pay
reasons.
increases, the top 1% wage grew 138% since 1979, while wages for the bottom 90% grew 15%. So they had a triple digit increase, the top 1%, and the bottom 90 had a 15% increase. I mean, that gap is huge, you know?
And we've discussed this before when we were talking about like taxes and the wealthy. Um, and
Oh,
I
or
have
like
a struggle
stocks
with
and
this
stuff like
because is
that
it
and
actually their
compensation
wages,
and
like their salary,
right,
or is
right.
it stocks and stock options and other like is it the full compensation package that they're measuring? And I do think that's a big reason why we have such a huge shift because I think it was in that time frame that suddenly uh, executives became far more concerned about
Yeah, you
the
brought that
company's
up. I mean,
stock
not
and
just
far
the
less
whatever the
concerned
last episode,
about
but
their
like
moral
before
obligation
about,
to
you know,
the
your
worker.
good or
And
bad, the
that's where,
first thing you have is a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders. It's not about
yeah,
the well-being of the workers at the company, you know?
yeah. And it's to a degree, it's heavily regulated, right? Like it's not regulated to the point where they're saying like, no, you can't pay your employees better, because obviously, like Costco
Yeah,
pays their
I'm sure
people
they
way
would be.
better,
Yeah.
and their
Right.
shareholders are
Right,
constantly
right, yeah.
pushing them to pay their employees less so that they can extract more profit out of the company, the shareholders, that is.
Mm-hmm.
So like you can pay your people higher wages and have lower earnings and exist on the stock market, but there is an SEC obligation that like you can't intentionally hurt the stock value in your company because it's going to also hurt the
That might be,
shareholders and cause a loss of earnings for
yeah, I'm going
them.
to actually
And there's
wite
all
that,
kinds of issues
I'm going to
and
write that
sticky
down
points
because,
from there.
like, I
So
wonder
Costco
when that
started with
happened.
that focus,
You know,
but for
like
a
when
company to
that was
make that
a
shift,
regulation or, whoops.
well, I haven't dug into it, but I saw a quote from, or heard a quote from Simon Sinek where he talks about uh, Milton Friedman's kind of theory started this shareholder supremacy line of thinking, and it's sort of the direction that we have taken since then. So, yeah, if you want to dig into that more deeply, it might be another good talking
There we
point.
go.
I think one of the big reasons, too, that we see sort of this shift where uh, average hourly earnings, real wages for Americans, the average American hasn't gone up as much as productivity is because
Right.
a lot of that additional profit from productivity went
Mm-hmm.
out to shareholders. And the vast majority of Americans don't
Yeah, I mean,
participate in
we
the
mentioned it
stock market
before where, like, you get
the
a,
same
like,
way
BP gets a
that the
big
wealthy
windfall and they just buy back
members
their
of our
stock,
society
you
do.
know, which is something an employees can't, you know, do. Dividends. Like, yeah.
Well, there's that, but I'm not even discussing that. I'm talking about like, you know, big dividends are paid out because there was a record profit quarter for the quarter,
Mm.
um,
Oh,
or even just like, oh, I bought
damn.
Starbucks stock in 1981. It's now worth all this much more money because there's been all this growth in the
Mm-hmm.
company. So the shareholder participated in the
Right.
growth of the company over that period of time, but it's not measured as wages. So that's, you know, the vast majority of Americans didn't get to do that. They didn't participate in that capacity. The ones that
Yeah, that's something
did,
I've actually
which are
been.
typically the more affluent members of our society, did benefit from it. And that's not looking at CEO incomes or anything else because
Right.
like that's just a separate argument. The CEO income, I would want to look at total compensation
There
packages
was
because I know a
some
lot of
company.
these huge
I think
CEOs
there was
only get
some
paid a
big
salary of
company in
like
the
half a
news
million
lately that took
only,
a
right?
cut because
But that might be
something happened. I'm trying to think. I think it was Ubisoft, the game company, I think that the CEO took a pay cut because they had a drastic whatever, and he just was like, "Fine, I'll take a pay cut until we can get the ship," basically. Which ironically, they released a pirate game, or they're releasing a pirate game soon. So I was like, it's kind of on the nose. Like, you take a pay cut to right the ship, and you're like, "Wow, we're coming out with this pirate game in a couple months." Like, man, yeah, yeah. I didn't mean. Oh, so we went over three,
Yeah.
right? We
No
went over
intended.
that's
What was the
the
next
that's
chart
the
you wanted to
thing,
talk
and then I
about?
wrote 4 down, which is the middle class wages are stagnant. Middle wage workers hourly wages is up 6% since 1971. Low wage workers are down 5%, while those in higher wages saw a 41% increase. So this is kind of like what you mentioned in one of the older articles, where they're getting a pay increase, but maybe I think they did bring up. I'm trying to see if they do talk about inflation somewhere in here. That it basically, like we mentioned in one of the earlier. Well, they talked about it specifically
All
sucked,
these
like
charts are
whatever
adjusted for
gains
inflation.
happened
Like that's
from
the whole point
your
they're making,
growth.
right?
Like
Is
if
that people.
inflation is at 7%, you get a 5% increase. Like you're negative. Like I'm bad at math, but I know you're -2 at that point. Like those are easy numbers to deal with. Where you're like, oh man, like. And the only other one I wanted to talk about was figure
Yep.
7. Sweet. See, I told you I took notes, man.
Which is where I
I
wanted
was
to
like,
go next,
well,
based
I'm
off
not
of
going to
what I was
write
saying
this
about
whole
CEO
chart
compensation.
down. That's ridiculous. And there's
Which
more
one?
numbers on these pages
I did
too, so
not. I
I'm
came less
upset. I'm
prepared
very
today than I
disappointed.
was when we tried to record.
Yeah. No, but yeah, that's the one where it talks
Anyway,
about. I just closed the window because I wanted to. We don't do screen share yet, so yeah, it says figure 7 was 296 times.
CEOs now make 296 times what a typical worker earns. And so what they did here is they say the typical worker and an employee earns X amount of money, and then
Right.
they're basically dividing the CEO's compensation by that employee's compensation. And I say compensation because, if the average worker at a company makes $45,000 and the CEO is making $500,000, that's not 296 times.
I think it's got 296 here, but this only goes from
I don't know
1965
exactly what
to
it is, but
2013. It's weird. It is weird looking at this chart though. It kind of Well, it tracks it between.
it's only like 7 times earnings. But that's
like
that's
it
salary,
really
that's
starts to
not
go
total
up in like the
compensation.
mid 90s, I would say, probably the early 90s. And I'm trying to think of what happened in the early 90s. That was it Enron? They were in the early 2000s. I'm trying to think of like what big. Well, that was the tech boom, wasn't it? Was like mid 90s.
I mean, you have the big, huge tech boom here, mid to late 90s, as we start to see that huge growth. I think, and I could be wrong, I think in this period,
Well,
in
it
the
seems
early
like both
90s, there
political
was some
parties,
level of
because
banking
that would have been
regulation.
Clinton.
Um,
Everybody blames Reagan for that, which, I mean, obviously he is to blame for some of that. But it just seems like anybody can really, like Clinton probably was like, sure, regulations suck. Let's remove these gates and let it go.
um, yeah, but like you said, I mean, it really, really
Oh,
takes off in there.
you're
But
right.
again, it's overall
You're like, my chair,
compensation.
no. I need this chair.
Oop, my chair lock failed. Uh, it's
Yeah.
it's overall compensation. It's not like salary. Now, I don't necessarily think that's an unfair comparison because
Right. Our compensation
right, like
package,
you or I have a total compensation package.
they get
The
stocks.
CEO has a total compensation package, right?
We get like
The only
health
difference is
insurance and vacation and stuff like that, and
theirs usually
401k.
has a large amount of stock or stock options, and so
Well, they get that in
well, I'm
addition
sure
to their stock options
I
and all
don't
that.
think
So
they really need that, but I'm sure they get it. Um, so if you look at
yeah.
this chart, you see like there's a huge spike
Oof.
around
That's
99
just
2000, which It goes all the way up to 383 times the average worker salary, CEO versus average worker. But then
Well,
the
okay,
dot-com
then
boom
problem
in
solved.
2008, it drops to 189. And that is no, no. It's like it's a huge disparity. I understand where you're going there. The point that it
Right.
illustrates is that that compensation is way more volatile because it is based off of stock value, not
Yeah.
based off of just
Yeah.
coming to work,
Yeah.
meeting an obligation, doing your job, and then leaving. Right now, is a CEO bringing 189 times value to the company? Are they?
Well, I mean, to bring
Is
the
their
pirate
leadership
thing back into it, you
producing
really
that
are.
much more
They
to the
consider
company
you
that
like
they're
a
worth that
captain,
much
right?
more? Is the
Like
question.
under you, like you've been on my Gaming with Grief episode. We talked about Activision Blizzard. Bobby Kotick recently was in even though they're going through the merger possibly with Microsoft, he still was reinstated as the CEO of Activision Blizzard, even with all this crazy stuff that has happened, because there's still value. There's their company's still valuable. Even though the stock dropped, it's still going up. I think some of it could. I mean, there's a lot of legal stuff involved. Some of it could be, hey, if this deal closed. I mean, it's kind of written on the wall that he's gone. So they could just be writing because what are they going to get an interim CEO for 6 months? No, they're going to probably wait for him to go, and then Phil Spencer, who's in charge of Microsoft, is going to be in charge of Activision and go. Hopefully, they're going to say, okay, we got to make some changes, because all this stuff that's happened. Anyway,
The question is, though, does Bobby Kotick
right.
provide enough value in his leadership to be worth paying whatever they pay him? Right? Like, I think that's one of the biggest challenges that I run into in our workforce. Right? Like, we don't
Right.
negotiate for our salaries very well as people, and you've talked about this from a union
I think it
perspective.
is that article
Actually,
we were
one of the
reading
other
that,
articles does highlight too
yeah,
that
it's one of the
somewhere in
figures
the
in there.
70s, like union enrollment actually goes down. It might actually, um, but just in general,
Yeah.
like we don't do a very good job
Yeah.
of negotiating because we
Yeah.
need a job and we have to pay our bills, and so we tend to take what we're offered far more readily. And the higher you go in wage earner or in like earnings, the workers that take the higher earnings jobs have a higher likelihood to negotiate for better
Yeah,
benefits,
there's this weird thing I've
better
noticed too with
compensation, salary,
I mean, it's all
vacation,
like
whatever else it may
anecdotal, but
be.
I know a lot of people that did that took they took the better pay and the whatever, and then they said immediately, like, I understand I'm getting paid more, but it's this thing of like automatically, like, okay, now you have all these extra responsibilities, and it's like, but I'm just being paid right now what I should be being paid. You know what I mean? So like, yeah,
Which is more common for someone that gets a big raise because a business feels like there has to be some other. I mean, it's very typical for a business owner in a small business, or
yeah,
even in management, that like if I'm going to give you more money, you should have more responsibility to justify that more money. Um, but what I'm talking about, right, is
hmm
well, I'll use an example of a software developer, right? Like they have a high demand skill. It's very easy for them to say, "Yeah, you're
right,
offering me 100,000. I want 110 because this guy's offering me 107." Whereas if you're a cash register clerk at a Walmart, if you go, "I want $15 an hour because that's what I need to
yeah.
live,"
And that's where the
the
union
guy
thing
can be
comes
like,
in,
"Oh,
where
well, I've got
I've
500
seen
people that are
my
willing to
local
do this
grocery store.
work.
The
So,
baggers went on strike, and
take a hike."
they were like, nope. And it's like that's where you have collective, like, because like Kroger's, because there's actually a baggers union, and they were like, this is what we're gonna offer you, and they're like, no. So like the checkers were still
Wow.
there, but the baggers, I think, were like a separate union. I don't know how that broke down, but they just had fewer. They're like, sorry, we got to do this all ourselves. Like they went on strike, and I was like, that's crazy. That you could be like, well, do you, or no, I had to do it myself. That's what it was. They're like, you got to bag yourself. And it was like,
Hmm. Hmm. Or this whole
Yeah.
argument of like, hey, I want a
I'll
discount
tell you. I'll
because
tell you.
I'm
I've
using
always had
self-checkout,
problems
right?
with
Like
self
you're not
checkout.
paying
The
for
only one that's
more
good is Home
efficient for you as
Depot.
a company,
The other ones
so
I
like
go
I
to,
expect to see some benefit.
they always call the attendant, and I'm like, I just scanned soap. Like, what is? No, every time. No, I'm not okay. Yeah, no, but every time,
Are
even
you
my
okay?
wife is like,
Like
"Do you want to do it?" I'm like, "Are
well,
we
wait,
flipping a coin?" Because I
Joe,
swear it's gonna
it's you,
stop
it's you.
halfway through. But Home Depot, not a problem. Scan everything unless it's a high ticket item and they have to like walk you. They're like, "I want to get a nail gun." Okay, well we got to walk you to the register. Other than that, everything goes through fine. But every time I go to the grocery store, it's like we're really rolling the dice to see if we can get through this without the attendant. I don't know, but yeah, there's I went to McDonald's a few years ago at a job site near a job site, and they had a kiosk. There was a person there to just give you your order. So it's like I want fries, whatever. You could say I don't want onions, I don't want pickles, just give me. And you're like, this is crazy. But if you think about it, they'd still need cooks. But like, do you really need someone to like? Oh,
So the last time I experienced that was at SeaTac. Lisa and I were flying down to Dallas last year, and they
nice.
had a whole bunch of kiosk stations at the McDonald's in the airport. Like it was like six
Oh
or
yeah.
eight.
Everyone wants some
And we
hash
had this
browns, man.
line behind them because it was breakfast time, so there was a ton of people lined up.
Wow.
And the counter, like behind the counter,
Yeah.
was full of
Yeah.
people. But
Yeah.
they were all just calling out orders and handing stuff
Yeah.
out. That's all they were
I
doing.
mean,
And then
that's
they had all the
yeah.
staff
I don't want
back preparing.
I don't want someone to lose their job, but like
So
I don't know. Is it advent? Like I didn't lose anything from the McDonald's experience by just walking up and getting my Big Mac, and I wasn't like, oh man, like this, I don't know. But with the automated stuff, there's always like I remember being. It was like a couple weeks ago. I hadn't been to McDonald's in years, and it was a couple weeks ago I went to McDonald's, and I was the only one in the drive-thru, and somehow they screwed my order up, and I was so hungry. I got back to where I was going and just sat in a parking lot and was like, how? Oh yeah, they screw you at the drive-thru, man.
I'm not going
They
to
screw you
quote
at the
it
drive-thru.
because I don't know
The
who's going to
joke.
be
It's
listening
so
to this or where
true.
they're going to be listening to it.
It's. But I was sitting there thinking of that when I opened up
Yeah, yeah. The Joe Pesci line.
90s. Yeah, 2000.
It's been true
Yeah.
since the earlier.
Yeah, I always hear that too. I heard
right?
that in my head. I heard him
And it's
screaming
been
that in
true
my head
even
when I
before
opened up
that.
my order. I
But
was
it
like,
feels like
man,
it's more common.
man, Joe
It feels
Pesci,
like
you
you
were
can
right.
almost
Deal
guarantee.
gets. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Oh, so closing statements, Avin. So you didn't
So you're
really
not going
find
to go
anything
back. You're not going to go
about
back and
the
make it
articles
better.
you read shocking. I think for me, it was the discrepancy. You always hear like, oh, it's whatever percent. Like you said, it may not be the whole picture because they could get stock option stuff. I still think that graph is pretty bad. Even if you were to bring it together, that Y is still on those graphs on that last article we read is still kind of troubling. And I totally agree with you. Look at that, we agree. No, the idea that we do good when the middle class is doing better, and for years, it's just the middle class is now disposable. So that's like a problem of
Mhm.
what are we doing? Like, like it's troubling.
It the feeling is, and I don't know how accurate this is, right? Like I haven't looked up the actual distribution of wages in the United States, so I could be wrong. But the feeling to me is that we are compressing
Mm-hmm.
uh, the middle class down closer and closer into the lower wage earning spectrum. And so it feels like maybe the low end of the middle class is growing,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe the high end of the middle class, like your high level
Yeah.
tech professionals, is maybe growing. And it could feel this way because of where we live. And then like anyone that's at the lower end of the middle class, or maybe even the high end of the lower class, is just sort of getting compressed down. And that's sort of the feeling or the sense. So that's why none of this really surprised me, because I've seen a lot of this stuff come out, a lot
Yeah.
of talking points about it. The problem is no one puts forth any good solutions, right?
Oh,
Like
are
this
we
is
are
where
we
I
doing
really
that? I got a
off
list of
with
stuff that
the
that
Democrats
makes me
and
mad.
the liberals as a whole, right? Like they love to make a big fuss. They love to make a big huge scene. They love to sit up a grandstand on their
Mm-hmm.
podiums talking about how this is just so terrible, i.e., Bernie Sanders and
I will say,
AOC,
I
right?
just saw.
Big, huge scene about
I
how
will say, I give
there is
AOC
and
a little bit
how
of credit. She
they're
was just at a
trying to
rally and she
keep
got arrested
the man's trying to keep you down.
for protesting. So, I mean, I'll just say, like, as far as if you really believe
There's
in
a whole bunch
something
of
and
got
you're willing
arrested.
to
It was like
stand on the
15 or
protest
16 of them.
line, no matter what I think about her politics or what I think about her as a politician, if you're willing to stand there and say, this is what I believe in, and someone arrests you and go, all right, take me in, like, I mean, I think there's value in that. And again, I think that, like, you're right. Like, all these people do grandstand. I do think Bernie has been doing it for a long time, so I believe him more when other people say it. And I do believe there is a few people like Manchin and Cinema. It's ridiculous to me that our government has now been set up, or at least is in this weird fulcrum where like two or three people can really screw things up for everybody. Really they can subvert the vote, and like it's. But again, the Democrats, there's no like a line. Like again, if we're gonna complain about Democrats, like there's no like. I mean, to not get into other episodes, I mean, with the Roe v. Wade thing.
Right?
For years, they had a chance to codify it, and they did nothing. And I think I saw a really good quote from someone that was protesting. A woman, she says, "I don't want my rights to be fundraising for you. Like you had years to do this, and what?"
Mm-hmm. And that is largely what it feels like, right? Like I don't think really any politician, for the most part, I would say it's a
Right.
very small percentage of people that actually represent us actually genuinely care. I think a lot of this is my own personal opinion. I have no facts to base this. I think a lot of politicians get into politics because
Yeah.
they
And
care,
money.
and
Yeah.
then very quickly it becomes way more about staying in power and leveraging that power for their own gain, and way less about the average person.
Yeah.
And at that point, like you start seeing all the grandstanding and making a big, huge scene. And
It was Roe
uh,
v. Wade.
I did see
Roe v.
AOC was
Wade.
arrested,
Yeah.
but I didn't see what it was over. Like I don't know what the
They.
protest
They.
was. I
I
just
don't.
saw
I
that
don't
he
know.
was arrested. It was a Roe v. Wade protest. Why
I
did
don't
they
know.
get arrested?
I think it's weird because you think
What
if
were
they
they
were that,
doing
because
that
it
wasn't
looked like from the
illegal?
footage I saw, they were pretty close to the Capitol. You think one of their aides could have filed for, like right to, you know what I mean, like public, like protest, whatever. Because you have to fill out paperwork, right?
Permit. So that's where I'm like, what did they do that was illegal, right? Like, did they not file for a permit? Oh, so then you who works in the government didn't follow the government process and got arrested.
Yeah.
Okay, this sounds like a setup to me.
I
Versus if there
saw,
were something
like
else
you
that
said,
was
I saw a
happening,
bunch of them, and I was
that would
like,
be a
you know
totally different
what?
situation. I don't know
Whatever
the
I think
details.
about them, like
The
if
point
you're
I was
willing to be
getting at
like,
that though,
fine, take me away. It's like, I mean, Bernie did that. They like drug him away in some of that footage I saw of him where, it was like I think it was Vietnam or something. They like had to drag him away, like.
the problem I have with that, like getting back to what I was trying to get to with AOC, Bernie, and the Democrats and the liberal kind of side of our government as a whole, is they
Yeah.
love to make a scene about it. They love to show themselves as
Mm-hmm.
um,
No,
the
I think with AOC and Bernie and
champion
like the
of the little
squad, I think
guy.
you're seeing
They
I
never
think you're
do
seeing
anything.
that break where they're like, what are we doing?
They never do anything.
Like you're not like we're just, what are we're treading water here, So even if you don't agree in their politics, I mean, one thing I will say for Trump and his ilk, and I've said it before, they did get things done. They said this is what we're gonna do, and we're gonna go do it. The Democrats is like, I don't really know, and I think there is people like AOC and other people that are like, hey guys, we got to do something eventually. We can't just like tread water. Because we could be like Nancy Pelosi and read a poem. When Roe v. Wade was overturned, it's like that's cool. That helps a lot of people.
Right?
It was a really bad poem too. Well, I mean, it was okay, but her reading was bad. I think of the poem. But
But I mean,
oh yeah,
and then it comes out that her husband bought a whole bunch of
yeah,
shares in a company during the pandemic, and then it grows. Like, yeah, they don't care about us. They don't, and I don't think that Republican politicians care about us any more than Democrat politicians, which is why, like, I am a huge proponent for term limits,
yeah.
and not just like, okay,
Have you
only
seen
so
those?
many times in Congress, in the House, You know,
I
there's
think
somebody in office in the
Reuters had an
Senate.
article years
Like
ago where they
overall
published.
term limits, like you can only serve in public
Oh
service
yeah.
this many years,
Well, if you think about it
and then you
too, like
cannot be a
you and I have
lobbyist.
skills, we
Like
can go
once
get
you are
another
done, you
job.
cannot be a
I'm
lobbyist.
trying to imagine what these politicians, what you could do if they can't be a lobbyist. Like what, maybe a consultant for an energy company. Like I don't. It's like it's so nebulous. Anyway.
Sales.
Wow, really because
Maybe some
okay.
consultancy. A lot of these
Some of the
guys
stuff
have
that's come out
lobbyists,
lately.
right?
I mean,
So you go off
we
and
talked
do
about Roe v.
your-
Wade, but like people forgot about the Miranda thing that
Right.
got overturned. Like apparently, cops still have to read your Miranda rights, but the way I understand it from different people on the different spectrum, you can't sue police if they don't read it to you correctly. So even though it messes with your even if if cops don't read you your due process, something can happen to the court case, but then you can't sue the police for screwing it up. So it could affect you going to jail because they don't read your Miranda rights correctly. But if you try to sue the police for illegitimate due process or whatever, they're still immune from prosecution. It's really weird. It's this weird thing that anyway, that might be a future episode. But we're getting to the end. I think again the last episode I still want to talk about it. And you brought it up. Next month is my choice. I want to talk about water. If you don't, just to say this, we always try to bring it back to grief. A lot of people have been struggling through the pandemic to make ends meet. And I think we should, I'm going to write it down. I think we should talk about the Great Resignation. But what I might have you do is we might do a 2-parter where I want to do the more political side of it. And then I've noticed in gaming a lot, there is this shift from work to home. But a lot of the companies that are doing it are finding it beneficial. And they're making it work for their employees. So Bungie, who is a local company they originally made Halo. They've now moved on to make Destiny and Destiny 2. They've done a work from home thing. Elon Musk, they got involved with the whole Elon Musk scandal because he said you can't do anything if you work from home. Nothing can get done. And them and some other developers said, no, we've made this work. You can get things done. It's possible. And so maybe we'll do a 2-parter of that. But next month, I want to talk about water because it is difficult to. It is a political thing. More people are running out of water. Water rights are incredibly complex in the West. All that kind of stuff. It is a thing. People are literally running out of water and having to move. But then again, I hate to quote Ben Shapiro, but he said, well, just move if you have a problem with global warming or whatever, or any kind of, and it's you can't just move. It's not that easy. What? Okay, well, anyway, so it'll be water. Avin, do you want to,
I have a limited
do you
time.
want to pimp anything before we leave? Do you want to?
Same thing I do all the time.
I'm a video behind, but they're very good.
Youragentguide.com or your.
I'm a video behind.
On YouTube. It's my. What was that? Oh, yes. And the whole purpose of Your Agent Guide is basically, I was an admin on a real estate team. I saw how many mediocre or not even mediocre level real estate agents are out there, people are working with. And so I wanted to provide education so people would be empowered and able to find good, talented real estate professionals in the area.
Yeah, I like it. You can check me out at Game of Grief. That comes out every week, even though this comes out every month. And I think with that, we will say adieu and talk to you guys again next month.